Hi guys, are you ready for chapter 6 of Prince Caspian? Now remember, Caspian has now run from his life. He learned that his uncle Miraz had kind of stolen the throne from him, that Caspian was the rightful king. And somebody who steals a throne, who steals that kind of position of authority, is a word that we're hearing inside Prince Caspian, and the word is usurper. So when you hear them use that word usurper, what they're saying is that Miraz, Caspian's uncle, has stolen it. And, Caspian learned some very frightening things about his uncle. All of the people that his uncle got rid of or killed in order to secure his spot as being king. Oh my goodness, what are the things that we would do to get the things we want? Looks like Miraz has gone down a pretty dark path. But Caspian is learning that he didn't know as much about Narnia as he thought, and that Narnia is older than he realized, and there were more people living in Narnia that he is now being introduced to as the rightful king of Narnia. So let's keep going. Chapter 6, The People That Lived in Hiding. Now began the happiest time that Caspian had ever known. On a fine summer morning, when the dew lay on the grass, he set off with the badger and the two dwarfs up through the forest to a high saddle in the mountains, and down on their sunny southern slopes, where one looked across the green wolds of Archenland. "We will go to the three bulgy bears," said Trumpkin. They came in the glade to an old hollow oak tree covered with moss, and Truffle Hunter tapped with his paw 3 times on the trunk, and there was no answer. Then he tapped again, and a woolly sort of voice from inside said, "Go away. It's not time to wake up yet." But when he tapped the 3rd time, there was a noise like a small earthquake from inside and a sort of door, and out came 3 brown bears, very bulgy indeed, and blinking their little eyes. And when everything had been explained to them, which took a long time because they were very sleepy, they said, just as Truffle Hunter had said, that a son of Adam ought to be king of Narnia, and all kissed Caspian. Very wet, snuffly kisses they were, and offered him some honey. Caspian did not really want honey without bread. To me, all you need is honey and peanut butter and a spoon, and we're good to go. But moving on. All right. He really did not want honey without bread at that time in the morning, but he thought it polite to accept it. It took him a long time afterward to get unsticky. After they went on until they came to tall beech trees, and Truffle Hunter called, "Pattertwig, Pattertwig, Pattertwig!" And almost at once, bounding out from a branch till he was just above their heads, came the most magnificent red squirrel that Caspian had ever seen. He was far bigger than the ordinary dumb squirrels which he had sometimes seen in the castle gardens. Indeed, he was nearly the size of a terrier dog, and the moment you looked at his face, you saw that he could talk. Indeed, the difficulty was to get him to stop talking, for, like all squirrels, he was a chatterer. He welcomed Caspian at once and asked if he would like a nut. Caspian said thanks, he would. But as Pattertwig went bounding away to fetch it, Truffle Hunter whispered in Caspian's ear, "Don't look. Look the other way. It's very bad manners among the squirrels to watch anyone going to his store or to look as if you wanted to know where it was." Then Pattertwig came back with the nut, and Caspian ate it. And after that, Pattertwig asked if he could take any messages to other friends. "For I can go nearly everywhere without touching foot to the ground," he said. Truffle Hunter and the dwarfs thought this was a very good idea, and gave Pattertwig messages to all sorts of people with odd names, telling them all to come to the feast in the council on Dancing Lawn at midnight 3 nights ahead. "And you better tell the 3 bulgies, too," said Trumpkin. We forgot to mention that to them. Their next visit were to the 7 brothers of Shuddering Wood. Trumpkin led the way to the saddle and then down eastward on the northern slope of the mountains, till they came to a very solemn-looking place among the rocks and fir trees. They went very quietly, and presently Caspian could feel the ground shake under his feet, as if someone were hammering down below. Trumpkin went to a flat stone at the top and stamped on it with his foot. After a long pause, it moved away by someone or something underneath, and there was a dark, round hole with a good deal of heat and steam coming out of it. In the middle of the hole was the head of a dwarf, very much like Trumpkin himself. There was a long talk here, and the dwarf seemed more suspicious than the squirrel or the bulgy bears had been. But in the end, the whole party were invited to come down. Caspian found himself descending a dark stairway into the earth. But when he came to the bottom, he saw firelight. It was the light of a furnace. The whole place was a smithy. The subterranean stream ran past one side of it. 2 dwarves at the bellows, another holding a piece of red-hot metal on an anvil with a pair of tongs, a 4th hammering it into, wiping their horny little hands on a greasy cloth, were coming forward to meet the visitors. It took some time to satisfy them that Caspian was a friend and not an enemy, but when they did, they all cried, "Long live the king!" And their gifts were noble. Mail shirts and helmets and swords for Caspian and Trumpkin and Knickerbrick. The badger could have had the same if he had liked, but he said he was a beast, he was, and if his claws and teeth could not keep his skin whole, it was not worth keeping. The workmanship of the arms was far finer than any Caspian had ever seen, and he gladly accepted the dwarf-made sword instead of his own, which looked, in comparison, as feeble as a toy and as clumsy as a stick. The 7 brothers, who were all red dwarfs, promised to come to the feast at Dancing Lawn. A little further on, in a dry, rocky ravine, they reached the cave of the 5 black dwarfs. They looked suspiciously at Caspian, but in the end the eldest of them said, "If he is against Miraz, we will have him for king." And the next oldest said, "Shall we go farther up for you, up to the crags? There's an ogre or 2 and a hag that we can introduce you to up there." "Certainly not," said Caspian. "I would think not indeed," said Truffle Hunter. "We want none of that sort on our side." Knickerbrick disagreed with this, but Trumpkin and the badger overruled him. It gave Caspian a shock to realize that the terrible, horrible creatures out of the old stories, as well as the nice ones, had some descendants living in Narnia at all. We should not have Aslan for a friend if we brought in that rabble," said Truffle Hunter as they came away from the cave of the black dwarfs. "Oh, Aslan," said Trumpkin cheerfully but contemptuously. "What matters much more is you wouldn't have me." "Do you believe in Aslan?" said Caspian to Knickerbrick. "I'll believe in anyone or anything," said Knickerbrick, "that'll bring these cursed Telmarine barbarians to pieces or drive them out of Narnia. Anything or anyone. Aslan or the White Witch. Do you understand?" "Silence, silence," said Truffle Hunter. "You do not know what you are saying. She is a worse enemy than Miraz and all his race." "Not to dwarfs, she wasn't," said Knickerbrick. Their next visit was a pleasanter one. As they came lower down, the mountains opened into a green glen or a wooded gorge with a swift river running at the bottom. The open place near the river's edge was where a mass of foxgloves and wild roses, and the air was buzzing with bees. Here Truffle Hunter called again, "Glenstorm! Glenstorm!" And after a pause, Caspian heard the sound of hooves. It grew louder till the valley trembled, and at last, breaking in and trampling the thickets, there came in sight the noblest creatures that Caspian had yet seen. the great centaur, Glintstorm, and his 3 sons. His flanks were glossy chestnut, and the beard that covered his broad chest was golden red. He was a prophet and a stargazer, and knew what they had come again. "Long live the king!" he cried. "I and my sons are ready for war. When is the battle to be joined?" Up until now, neither Caspian nor the others had really been thinking of war. They had some vague idea, perhaps, of an occasional raid on some human farmstead, or of attacking parties of hunters if it ventured too far into these southern wilds. But in the main, they had only thought of living to themselves in the woods and the caves and building up an attempt at the old Narnian hiding. As soon as Glimstorm had spoken, everyone felt much more serious. Do you mean a real war to drive out Miraz out of Narnia?" asked Caspian. "What else?" said the centaur. "Why else does your majesty go clad in mail and girt with sword?" "Is it possible, Glintstorm?" said the badger. "The time is ripe," said Glintstorm. "I watch the skies, badger, for it is mine to watch, as it is for yours to remember. Tarva and Alambil have met in the halls of the high heaven, and on earth a son of Adam has once more risen to rule and name the creatures. The hour is struck. Our council at the dancing lawn must be a council of war." He spoke in such a voice that neither Caspian nor the others hesitated for a moment. It now seemed to them quite possible that they might win a war, and quite certain that they must wage one. As it was now past the middle of the day, they rested with the centaurs and ate such food as the centaurs provided: cakes of oaten meal and apples and herbs and juice and wine. The next place they went to visit was quite near at hand, but they had to go a long way around in order to avoid a region in which the men lived. It was well into the afternoon before they found themselves in level fields, warm between the hedgerows. There Truffle Hunter called at the mouth of a little hole in a green bank, and out popped the last thing Caspian expected: a talking mouse. He was, of course, bigger than a common mouse, well over a foot high when he stood on his hind legs, and with ears nearly as long, though broader than a rabbit's. His name was Reepicheep, and he was a happy and martial mouse. He wore a tiny little rapier at his side and twirled his long whiskers as if they were a mustache. "There are 12 of us, sire," he said with a dashing and graceful bow, "and I place all the resources of my people unreservedly at your majesty's disposal." Caspian tried hard and successfully not to laugh, but he couldn't help thinking that Reepicheep and his people could very easily be put into a washing basket and carried home on one's back. It would take too long to mention all the creatures who Caspian saw that day: Clodsley the shovel mole, the 3 hard-biters who were also badgers like Truffle Hunter, Camilla the hare, and Hogglestock the hedgehog. They rested at last beside a well at the edge of the wide and level circle of grass, bordered with tall elms which now threw long shadows across it, for the sun was setting. The daisies were closing, and the rooks were flying home to bed. Here they supped on food which they had brought with them, and Trumpkin lit his pipe. Knickerbrick was not a smoker. "Now," said the badger, "if only we could wake the spirits of these trees and this as well, we should have done a good day's work." "Can't we?" said Caspian. "No," said Truffle Hunter. "We have no power over them. Since the humans came into the land, felling forests and defiling streams, the dryads and the naiads have sunk into a deep sleep. Who knows if they will ever stir again? And what a great loss to our side. The Telemarines are horribly afraid of the woods, and once the trees moved in anger, our enemies would go crazy with fright and be chased out of Narnia as quick as their legs could carry them." What imaginations you animals have, said Trumpkin, who didn't believe in such things. But why stop at the trees and the waters? Wouldn't it be nicer if the stones started throwing themselves at old Miraz? The badger only grunted at this, and after there was such a silence that Caspian had nearly dropped off to sleep, when he thought he heard a faint musical sound from the depth of the woods at his back. Then he thought it was only a dream and turned over again. But as soon as his ear touched the ground, he felt or heard, it was hard to tell which, a faint beating or drumming. He raised his head. The beating noise at once became fainter, but the music returned, clearer this time. It was like flutes. He saw that Truffle Hunter was sitting up, staring into the wood. The moon was bright. Caspian had been asleep longer than he thought. Nearer and nearer came the music, a tune wild and yet dreamy, and the noise of those many light feet, till at last, out from the wood into the moonlight, came dancing shapes such as Caspian had been thinking of all his life. They were not much taller than dwarfs, but far slighter and more graceful. Their curly heads had little horns on the upper part of their bodies, gleamed naked in the pale light, but their legs and feet were those of goats. Fawns! Cried Caspian, jumping up, and in a moment they were all around him. It took next to no time to explain the whole situation to them, and they accepted Caspian at once. Before he knew what he was doing, he found himself joining the dance. Trumpkin was heavier and jerkier with movements, but likewise an even Truffle Hunter hopped and lumbered about as best he could. Only Knickerbock stayed where he was, looking on in silence. The fawns footed it all around Caspian to their reedy pipes, their strange faces, which seemed mournful and merry all at once, looked on to his. Dozens of fawns and minches and oblinches and dumbness and volans and voluntius and gerbus and ninius and nausus and patterwig had sent them all. When Caspian awoke the next morning, he could hardly believe that it all had not been a dream. But the grass was covered with little cloven hood marks. So Caspian is gathering an army, and according to the centaur, it looks like it might be war. Well, you'll have to wait till chapter 7, which is entitled Old Narnia in Danger. I wonder what happens. Come back and listen, and you'll know too.